Chapter 4. After that, the danger that Izuku's quirk puts him in becomes more real. Inko sits him down a few days later and tells him everything Dr. Tsubasa warned her about the day his quirk manifested. She hadn't wanted to fully tell him when he was younger because she didn't want him to worry, or worse, think his quirk was a bad thing. But now it's clear that in order for him to be safe, for him to really take his safety seriously, she needs to tell him everything. So she begins by explaining how Dr. Tsubasa said his quirk is very strong and will only get stronger as he grows up, which is a wonderful thing, but it means they have to take some precautions. She goes on to say that because healing quirks are so rare, especially powerful ones like Izuku's, that it's not unheard of for healers to be sought after by both heroes and villains. The latter because they can't go to the hospital after a fight, so healers are especially valuable to them. In fact, healers getting captured by villains isn't something that might happen but something that can and has. She hesitates to mention the incident with Endeavor's healer, not wanting to scare her son, but eventually she tells him, he deserves to know everything now. Izuku listens with a blank look on his face, gazing down at his lap the entire time. He stays silent when Inko finishes and it makes the woman fidget nervously. Finally, she takes his hands into hers and has him meet her gaze. Her eyes are watery but her gaze is firm. Baby, she starts, then clears her throat. Izuku, I don't want to scare you. I never wanted to scare you by telling you this, It's okay, Mom, he says, I understand. It's a little weird, you know? I mean, I'm just me. It's weird to think that I'm desirable to people I don't even know and just for my quirk. It's just weird. He scratches the back of his head. And I always thought that Kaken was a bit paranoid and overprotective, but now, I guess, it makes sense. And I bet he's gonna be a lot worse after this. He lets out a huff of laughter, but there isn't much humor in it. Inko gives him a sad smile and squeezes his hands. I know it's probably going to be annoying and tiresome being attached to his hip all the time, but I need you to take it a bit more seriously. Katsuki-kun is your protector. He knows that, and I need you to know it as well. Izuku presses his lips together and nods once. And it won't just be him, Inko adds. Dr. Tsubasa-san said that a lot of hero agencies upped the security around their healers after the incident with Endeavor's agency. So, just know that Katsuki-kun isn't going to be the only overprotective hero you're going to have to deal with when you get older. She laughs. Izuku rolls his eyes but smiles a bit. I'm excited for you to become a healer, his mother says, but you haven't joined the world of heroes yet. And until you do, you need to be careful. So. She takes a deep breath before continuing. I've talked about it with Mitsuki-kun and Masaru-kun, and I think it would be a good idea to enroll you in self-defense classes. Izuku perks up. Really? I know it might be a lot on top of school and I know you like to hang out with your friends, but no, Mom, I'd love to. Izuku insists, leaning forward. Finally he'll be able to fend for himself if he needs to. Inko blinks in surprise. Really? He nods rapidly and she smiles. Oh, good. Katsuki-kun would be going with you, of course it'll be good for him too. Maybe give him an outlet for that explosive energy. Yeah. Izuku agrees eagerly. When do we start? Oh, next week, Inko says, giving him a firm look, if even. You're still recovering from your concussion, sweetie. Izuku sighs heavily and groans. I told you I'm feeling a lot better. My head only hurts a little bit now. And you'll start next week when your head doesn't hurt at all. Inko's voice has a tone of finality and Izuku knows there's no budging on this. Fine, he grunts. So he now has self-defense classes to look forward to while he recovers. This whole week has been kind of awful for Izuku. First he nearly gets kidnapped and now he has to do absolutely nothing for an entire week. He can't even play video games or watch movies. The nurse told Inko that electronics are bad for someone recovering from a concussion, so now his screen time is severely limited. It doesn't help that he's been having nightmares just about every night too. During the first night when Kaken had come over for a sleepover, Izuku thought perhaps he'd be too tired from his ordeal to have a nightmare. But no, at 2 a.m. he woke up thrashing and screaming, scrambling backwards in his bed to escape his non-existent kidnappers. Kaken had jumped from his futon and been at his side in an instant, pulling him into a tight hug when he whimpered and cried. He seemed upset, too angry, mostly, and had nudged Izuku aside so he could crawl into bed beside him. Izuku clung to his arm and fell asleep again, only for Kaken to wake him up from another nightmare at 5 a.m. So, needless to say, he's both exhausted and bored out of his mind. And on top of all this, he has to somehow tell Haru that he lost the All Might stuffy he won for him. He didn't realize until the next day that he had lost the gift during his ordeal and instantly felt bad. Haru would probably be forgiving if he knew the truth, but Kaken had explained their sudden absence by texting the group that Izuku felt sick, so he took him home. Izuku is grateful for that. As much as he likes his friends, he knows that news of Izuku's near kidnapping would spread like a wildfire across school if any of them got wind of it. So now he has to think of what to tell Haru. Or maybe he can just take a nap and hope that the boy doesn't mention it when they go back to school. Yeah, that sounds better. At least, during his very long week of rest, he's able to spend some quality time with his hero journals. He adds a couple of pages for Eraserhead, who he hadn't known about until the hero rescued him. He was only able to thoroughly freak out the next day. He had met a pro hero, an underground one, and talked to him. Like, actually talked to him, not just sputtered awkwardly and begged for his autograph. Izuku's almost glad he had a concussion then, so at least he was too dazed to embarrass himself. Still, Eraserhead was so cool. Izuku diligently writes down what little he learned about him from their encounter and spends the short amount of time he's allowed on the computer researching more about him. Not much is known about the underground hero, which isn't very surprising, but Izuku is at least able to find out about his quirk and fighting techniques. The latter part he thinks is very cool. He basically fights quirkless. He rambles about his findings to Kaken, who comes to his house every day that week to keep him company. The blonde doesn't seem too interested but listens anyway because, like Izuku, there's not much for him to do. He doesn't want to play video games if Izuku can't play with him, and they can't go train in the backyard either because Inko wants him to rest. So they're both bored. They talk about anything and everything, from what they ate for dinner to their futures at A. Because of course they're going to A. Nothing could make them happier than going to All Might's alma mater, even if Izuku will probably have to apply for general studies. He wonders if he'll meet Recovery Girl if he gets in, and that leads to him pulling out his healer journal. Kaken is kind enough to use Izuku's phone and computer for him and reads out loud whatever Izuku wants him to research. They spend an entire afternoon updating Izuku's healer journal, the greenette scribbling down information while the blonde reads with a disinterested tone. Still, that eventually gets boring. Izuku is grateful for his friend's presence but feels bad that he's sacrificing a week out of his summer break just to sit around with him and do nothing. Surely there are other fun things he would rather be doing, but when he mentions it, Kaken just nudges him with his foot and tells him to not be stupid. Sushi, at least, is enjoying his constant presence. Inko gave the cat a very stern talking to for following Izuku into the city, which was very amusing to watch, but now Sushi is living his best life since Izuku has time to spoil him. He and Kaken discover that the feline, for some reason, really likes water. Izuku hasn't used the bathtub in years, mostly because he just prefers the efficiency of showering, but since he has nothing else to do he started taking long soaks in the hot water. And without fail, Sushi always somehow gets into the bathroom, even if he closes the door, and proceeds to jump in with him. Kaken calls Sushi a freak and the cat merely hisses at him in response. After what feels like ages, Izuku's week of rest is finally over and he's feeling more restless than ever. He has to practically beg his mom to let him and Kaken walk a couple of blocks away to get ice cream from a small corner shop. He doesn't blame her for her incessant worrying, but it does get a bit annoying, especially when he notices Kaken glancing around suspiciously every few seconds as they walk. He hopes this paranoia won't last too long. Maybe if he gets really good at self-defense they won't worry so much. At least, that's what he's hoping for as he walks into the martial arts gym with Kaken for their first class. It's exciting and nerve-wracking at the same time, but he relaxes slightly when the teacher greets them with a wide smile and mentions that all the other students are beginners too. Kimura-sensei is super nice, even though she looks really intimidating. Her skin is made up of hard, purple-tinted scales that are tough like crocodile skin and her eyes are yellow with slitted pupils. Despite this, she has a soft voice and a bubbly personality, but it becomes clear she also doesn't take any bullshit when Kaken makes a snide comment after she says that the first couple of lessons will be just learning how to properly throw punches and kicks. The blonde blinks in surprise when her entire personality changes and she throws a fiery retort at him that makes the rest of the class snicker. He clearly takes her a bit more seriously after that. The self-defense classes are fun but a lot harder than Izuku thought they would be. Once school starts back up again, Izuku finds himself restraining himself from using his quirk just so that he has enough energy to get through his after-school lessons. They're only on Sunday, Tuesday, and Thursday, but Kimura makes it very clear she expects them to keep practicing at home. So, after a few months of now real training, Izuku and Kaken start going on runs together. The lessons are physically demanding for both of them, so they figure that running might help them build muscle and become stronger. Izuku likes it, especially when he discovers that he's a faster runner than Kaken, which pisses his friend off. Their casual jogging often turns into full-on sprinting as they race each other. It's super fun, even if it does leave their legs shaking with exhaustion afterwards. Izuku soon starts having to put his hair into a small ponytail when he exercises. When Kaken questions why he's growing out his hair, Izuku replies that he just feels like it. He doesn't mention that he thought it would be cool to grow his hair out like eraserheads that would, no doubt, lead to endless teasing. He's not sure how long he's going to grow it or if he's even going to keep it this way, but he'll see how it goes. As time goes by and the two boys get older, Inko gradually becomes more relaxed. She still worries about Izuku, but at least he doesn't have to text her every 10 minutes when he's somewhere that isn't school or home. She listens with a smile on her face when Izuku comes home and tries to show her the moves he learned during self-defense class that day, and he knows that his growing strength is definitely helping to ease her mind. Kaken clearly enjoys the classes too. A bit too much, actually. It's not super concerning at first because he's usually too sore and tired to do much outside of class, but once they start learning how to actually fight, things start to take a bit of a downwards spiral. Izuku first notices it when Kaken eagerly jumps up to volunteer when Kimura says she needs someone to act as an attacker so she can show them a particular defense move. Kaken gets knocked to the ground, of course, but Izuku finds it a bit odd how excited he gets whenever they do one-on-one fighting. He's always willing to take the offensive role, and it only starts to become a bit of a problem when Kimura starts actually teaching them how to attack, deeming it important to learn both defensive and offensive skills. Then one day Izuku walks onto the schoolyard with his lunch in hand just in time to see Kaken using one of the new offensive moves on a fellow classmate. And that's when things take a turn for the worse. It's not that Izuku's unused to Kaken getting into fights. He's healed his friend more times than he can count after he gets into a scuffle. The problem now is that Kaken is no longer just showing off his quirk or roughhousing. He's got real fighting experience and is practicing those moves on random school kids. It horrifies Izuku and he immediately tries to put an end to it, but Kaken doesn't seem too pleased with him. "Come on, Kaken, you've got to admit it's kind of unfair," Izuku protests one day as they're walking home, You know a lot more about fighting than they do, and one day you're gonna get someone really hurt. So? Kaken rolls his eyes. I've got you around, so why does it matter if they get hurt? Taken aback, Izuku scowls. I'm not going to heal people just so you can beat them up again. Kaken just grumbles in response. After a moment, he snaps, and who cares if it's unfair? Fights are hardly ever fair, and those kids know what they're getting into when they're challenging me. Izuku would hardly call it challenging. Kaken is usually the one to seek out fights. Sighing, he changes tactics and instead suggests, listen, why don't we start sparring after school? It'll be good to burn off any extra energy you have, and I'm sure Kimura-sensei will be glad to see that we've gotten some more practice in. Kaken doesn't look impressed. Well, yeah, but... He turns his head away and grumbles unintelligibly under his breath. Smiling a bit, Izuku nudges his shoulder and says, "Come on. It'll be fun." Yeah, but I can't. Kaken cuts himself off and Izuku tilts his head curiously. The blonde lets out a ragged sigh and gestures vaguely with his hand. I mean, I can't hurt you, so what's the point? Izuku blinks in surprise. His stomach churns uncomfortably. Something about what he said doesn't sit right with him. Clearing his throat, he asks warily, do you want to hurt people? Kaken glances at him but doesn't respond. Izuku swallows. His friend's violent streak has always been a bit annoying but has generally never really been a cause for concern. But now... Well, if you say it like that it sounds bad, Kaken finally huffs. It is bad, Izuku says immediately, then hesitates. Kaken, I don't think you should want to hurt people. The other boy is quiet for a moment, then suddenly snorts and bumps his shoulder. Oh, relax, Izuku. He sneers, you're overreacting. I just like to mess around and roughhouse a bit. Izuku must not look very convinced, because he adds, but fine, yeah, whatever, let's spar if it'll make you feel better. It does, but only a little bit. They spar in their self-defense class sometimes, so doing it after school isn't really anything new. It seems to slightly satisfy Kaken's violent tendencies, but the boy is still much too harsh to the other kids at school for Izuku's liking. It starts with Haru. Kaken has never really liked Haru, and Izuku has never really understood why. Haru is kind and friendly and can always make Izuku laugh until his cheeks hurt, but for some reason when they turn 12 Kaken decides to start picking on him. It's just little things at first, rude comments about his quirk or making fun of something he did. Izuku does his best to ease the tension with a light smile and a changing of subjects, but soon it's not enough. As they get older, the occasional teasing becomes constant, turning meaner and crueler every day. Even when Haru eventually stops hanging out with them, Kaken still seeks him out to pester him. And where Kaken leads, Tsubasa and Inaba follow. It's really sad to watch, actually. To see Haru's former friends turn against him and relentlessly torment him. Izuku tries to soothe him in between class periods or right after lunch, but when Kaken finds out he gets pissed and does everything he can to stop Izuku from speaking with Haru. The situation leaves a very bad taste in Izuku's mouth. He just feels so sorry for Haru. He hates seeing the familiar helpless look in his eyes when Kaken starts hounding him. It frustrates him and it angers him too. But no matter what he says, no matter how much he protests this harsh treatment, Kaken doesn't let up. In fact, he starts harassing other students too, but Haru is his favorite victim. It all comes to a head during the first month of their third year of junior high. Kaken and Izuku are both 14 years old, the former almost 15, and puberty is hitting hard. Hormones are high and Kaken's violent streak is returning with a vengeance. Over the years, both he and his quirk have grown dramatically. Self-defense classes on top of regular exercise has led to Kaken developing a good few pounds of muscle. Izuku hasn't bulked up as much as his friend has, but he's lean and defined and, most importantly, he's still faster than him, so there's that. Aside from Kaken's increase in muscle and height, He hasn't changed much appearance-wise. Neither has Izuku, although his hair is a lot longer now, falling a few inches below his shoulders. In contrast, his quirk hasn't grown much, although Kaken's definitely has. The boy's explosions are so powerful they can be heard from the other side of school. But what's worse is that he's become unafraid to use them against other people. Izuku tries to convince himself that it's just hormones, that hormones are the reason why Kaken's become more aggressive and pushy with him lately, why he goes as far as to physically drag him away from people he doesn't want him to talk to. That hormones are why he continues to start fights with other kids, even when no one is crazy enough to want to get into a fight with him anymore, so he just ends up pouncing on innocent victims. That hormones are why he teases and sneers at his own friends. But there's no way hormones can explain why Kaken treats Haru the way he does. It drives Izuku crazy, especially since Haru has never done anything to wrong him. In fact, he actively avoids Kaken because he knows what'll happen if the blonde catches him. So when Kaken starts attacking Haru after school one day during the second week of their third year, Izuku tries once again to stop him. Kaken! Izuku cries out, running towards the two boys rolling around in the dirt. Kaken, stop it! Please! He almost reaches them when he's suddenly stopped by a large red wing. Hey, Midoriya-kun, Tsubasa says, grinning at him. Behind him, Izuku can see Haru desperately snapping at Kaken with his face turned into a dog's snout. Oh, don't worry about Bakugo-kun, Tsubasa continues, he's just teaching Haru a lesson. He's hurting him. Izuku protests, flinching when he hears an explosion followed by a yelp of pain. Stop it! Kaken, stop it! He tries to run towards them again, but Tsubasa's wing stops him once more, this time blocking his view too. The larger boy steps closer. Come on now, Midoriya-kun, Tsubasa says. He starts slowly flapping his wings towards Izuku, forcing him to step backwards or get hit. Hey Tsubasa-kun! Frustrated, Izuku tries to step around, but Tsubasa's wings have grown with him and are much larger than they used to be. Izuku grunts as a wing hits his chest, gentle enough to not hurt him but hard enough to push him back. Relax, Midoriya-kun, this is just hero stuff, Tsubasa says dismissively, using his wings to herd the smaller boy away. Don't concern yourself with this. Bakugo-kun will walk you home soon enough. To Izuku's disbelief, the boy is smiling at him like nothing is wrong, like he doesn't even realize that what Kaken is doing is horrible. He can still hear the angry yells and explosions from his childhood friend behind Tsubasa, as well as Haru's grunts and yelps of pain. It makes Izuku's eyes sting with frustrated tears and a hard ball form in his throat. A feeling of helplessness rises within him, but it only angers him even more, spurring him into action. With a hard shove, he pushes past Tsubasa's wing with his shoulder and dashes over to the two boys. Kaken has Haru pinned to the ground and raises his fist once more, sparks dancing across his skin. Kaken, no! Izuku lunges forward and wraps his arms around Kaken's chest, stumbling backwards as he drags him off of Haru. Kaken sputters and thrashes wildly, but it buys Haru enough time to scramble out from underneath the blonde and stagger to his feet. Izuku watches as Haru, burned and bruised with a bleeding nose, casts him a grateful look and runs away before Kaken manages to break out of his hold. Izuku, what the fuck? Kaken shrieks, twisting away from him and whirling around. What's your fucking problem? You! Izuku shouts, clenching his fists as he glares angrily. Kaken, you could have killed him. Kaken rolls his eyes and scoffs. Oh, don't be so dramatic, Izuku. I was just roughing him up a bit. No, you weren't. You were hurting him. Izuku protests. What did he ever do to you anyway? He was pissing me off, Kaken states, as if that explains everything. What the hell are you even doing here? I thought I've told you a million times to stay out of the way when I fight. Yeah. Sorry, Tsubasa says, scratching the back of his head as he walks over to them. He got past me. Kaken arches an eyebrow and snorts. How pathetic are you to let a guy with a healing quirk get past you? Izuku frowns, his heart still thudding with adrenaline. What's that supposed to mean? He snaps. It means Kaken swings his head back to fix him with a hard look, poking him in the chest, with a finger. That you've got no business getting involved with fights. You're gonna be a healer, not a hero, so quit acting like you are anything more than a guy with a healing quirk. Izuku's eyes widen and he stumbles back a step, as if struck by a physical blow. A flash of something passes over Kaken's face before it regains its usual cocky expression. Izuku swallows and grits his teeth, glaring hard. Well, anyway, we gonna head to the arcade or what? Tsubasa asks. Inari-kun should be here soon. Yeah, Kaken huffs, still eyeing Izuku. Sure, whatever. He pauses before clearing his throat impatiently, turning his face to show his bruised cheek where Haru must have landed a hit on him. He doesn't say anything, but the expectation is clear. Izuku almost laughs out loud. Kaken seriously expects him to heal his injuries after saying something like that to him? Bullshit. Izuku usually tries not to curse much, but right now he wants to scream obscenities at his childhood friend. But instead he just takes another step back. I need to get something first, he says, voice hollow. I forgot something in the locker room. I'll come with you, Kaken starts to say. No, Izuku interrupts, already turning away. I'll be right back. Without waiting for a response, he turns and dashes over to where he saw Haru disappear. He spots the boy sitting against the wall next to the water fountain, hissing as he dabs at his burns with a wet tissue. Haru-kun, Izuku whispers. Haru flinches but relaxes slightly when he realizes it's him. He gives the gurinet a weary smile that Izuku cannot return. He slowly walks over to where the boy is sitting, gasping softly when he sees the extent of the wounds littering his body. Burns, scrapes, bruises. God, Kaken brutalized him. I'm sorry, he croaks, falling to his knees in front of Haru. I'm so sorry, I should have stopped him sooner. I don't understand why he treats you this way. Izuku-kun, it's okay, Haru says, and Izuku lets out a single wet laugh at the old nickname. This isn't your fault, Haru continues. I guess Bakugo-kun found out I was thinking of applying to a— You are? Izuku blinks in surprise. I was, Haru corrects, then winces. Now I'm thinking maybe it's best if I don't. I only mentioned it to a couple of people, but Bakugo-kun must have found out, anyway, and, well. He gestures to himself. He's pretty adamant about you and him being the only ones from this school to get into a— Izuku grits his teeth. I didn't know you wanted to be a hero, he admits. Oh, no. Haru shakes his head. I was going for general studies. Izuku can't believe his ears. If Kaken beat up Haru because he wanted to get into the hero course, well, it wouldn't have made it okay, but at least it would have made sense. Kaken's always been the competitive type. But to beat up Haru just because he wants to get into the same school as him? God, what the hell has Kaken turned into? Izuku's never been so pissed off before in his life. Taking a deep breath through his nose in an attempt to calm himself, Izuku reaches forward and places a hand on one of the burns on Haru's arm. His quirk activates automatically in response to direct contact with the wound in Haru's eyes. Izuku focuses on the energy flowing out of him, healing burn after burn until He. Izuku lets out a choked yelp as he's suddenly yanked backwards by the scruff of his shirt. Kaken brushes past him and looms over Haru, who is quickly scrambling to his feet. What the fuck do you think you're doing? Kaken snarls, eyes narrowing when he notices Haru's lack of injuries. Think you can fucking use my healer's quirk without my permission? I'll kick your ass even harder this time. Kaken, no. Izuku shouts, jumping in front of him and pressing a hand to his chest to stop him. Leave him alone. Get the fuck out of my way, dumbass. Kaken snaps, trying to shoulder him aside, but Izuku won't let him. No. I need to teach this fucker another lesson. He needs to learn his fucking place. Then, Kaken glares daggers at Izuku and adds venomously, and maybe you do too. Slap. Kaken stumbles back a couple of steps, lifting a hand to his stinging cheek in shock. His eyes are wide as he stares at Izuku, stunned. Behind him, Izuku can hear Haru's fading footsteps as he takes the chance to run away. He's breathing heavily and glaring at Kaken, but he's also shaken. He's never struck Kaken before in his life, and the fact that he did so shocked both of them. However, Kaken quickly recovers and peels his lips back in a snarl. He lunges forward, grabs Izuku, and slams his back against the wall. Izuku yelps at the impact, but Kaken is in his face before he can do anything. What the fuck do you think you're doing? He hisses, his red eyes burning with fury. Normally Izuku would shrink back and try to ease his friend's anger, but now he's too pissed to even consider it. He gets right back in Kaken's face and spits, "You are a bully, Kaken." He tries to squirm free, but Kaken has a firm grasp on his biceps. Chest heaving with every ragged breath, Izuku shouts, "You are mean, Kaken. You are so mean and cruel, and I don't understand why. You treat everyone around you so horribly. What is wrong with you?" "What's wrong with me?" Kaken barks, "What's wrong with you? How many times have I told you not to talk to that fucker? But instead of listening to me, you go behind my back and choose to heal him over me? It's my quirk, Kaken, and I'll use it however I damn well please." Izuku growls back at him. "No you fucking won't." Kaken shouts, shaking him, "Not if I fucking tell you not to." Fed up, Izuku tries again to break free of his hold, but Kaken merely readjusts his grip and shoves him back against the wall. They struggle against each other for a few moments before Izuku hisses, "God, you are so controlling, Kaken. You can't just push me around however you like and expect me to be okay with it. You can't expect me to stand back and watch you hurt people that don't deserve it. How can you expect to be a good hero if you can't even be a decent human being? If you keep this shit up, then you can forget about me ever becoming your healer. I will never stay by your side if all you do is hurt people." Kaken freezes at this, his red eyes wide and glaring. His whole body is trembling with rage and his grip on Izuku's arms is punishing. Izuku struggles to swallow past the hard lump in his throat as he glares at the blonde with watery eyes. Kaken is quiet for a few long moments. Then, still holding Izuku's gaze, he leans closer and hisses in a low voice, "I'm not going to let you mess everything up, you little shit. I'm going to become the best damn hero this world has ever seen, and you're going to become the best damn healer." His voice quivers with fury as his hands flex their grip. "And you are going to be mine." Izuku stares at him, feeling like he's about to throw up. Without a word, Kaken suddenly grabs Izuku's hand and lifts it to his face. The greenet only realizes what he's doing when he feels his quirk activate in response to the bruise on his cheek. Disgusted, Izuku tries to pull his hand away. "Stop it." Kaken just tightens his grip and glares at him. "Let me go, Kaken." Izuku spits, pulling harder. "Let me go you ass, let me go." "Hey, guys, are we going?" Or the two freeze as Inaba stares at them. His eyes lock on Kaken's hands grabbing Izuku, and for a moment the latter feels a spark of hope in his chest. But no, Inaba won't stand up to Kaken, not even for him. Is everything alright?" Before Kaken can respond, Izuku headbutts him in the nose. As soon as his grip slackens, Izuku shoulders past him and dashes away. "Izuku!" He hears Kaken call out, "Oi, where the fuck do you think you are going? Izuku! Leave me alone!" He shrieks, not sparing a glance behind him. Footsteps pound against gravel as Kaken gives chase, but luckily Izuku has always been faster than the blonde. He dashes past the school gates and rounds the corner sharply, spewing apologies as he nearly rams into multiple passerbys. He runs harder than he's ever run before, tears flying in the wind as desperation claws at his chest. "God," He feels like he can't breathe. He feels stuck, so utterly trapped. He feels like he's about to pass out. Izuku stumbles to a stop and presses his hand against a building, chest heaving as he gasps for air. Kaken stopped chasing him a few blocks back, but even so, his eyes dart around anxiously. People give him curious looks as they walk by him. After a few minutes, he finally catches his breath and straightens up. A quick glance around reveals that he doesn't really know where he is, but he finds himself not caring much. All he can think about is Kaken. "That ass," Izuku hisses, his voice breaking. The sidewalk is blurry beneath him. Wiping away tears, he starts walking down the street and muttering under his breath. How could Kaken say something like that? The look in his eyes terrified him, genuinely terrified him. He felt like a mouse caught in a cat's claws. He'd always known that Kaken was overprotective of him, especially around people like Haru. He just always thought it was because Haru could make him laugh and it made Kaken jealous, since he'd always had Izuku's attention since they were kids. But no, now Kaken is being downright possessive. Like anyone who could take Izuku's attention away from him is some sort of challenger or threat to him. Izuku sniffles and wipes his nose, recalling Kaken's words on the day his quirk manifested. It was after Andy Mitsuki had teased her son that he'd better keep Izuku close or another hero would snatch him up because healers are in such high demand. What the hell? No way. If you're gonna be anyone's healer, you're gonna be mine. Then when they were discussing Izuku's safety later, I'll beat up any fucker who tries to take him. Then at school. And guess what? When I'm a hero, Izuku's gonna be my healer. Mine, 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 Izuku grumbles under his breath. He'd never realized how much the word bothered him until now. I'm not yours, you jerk. He scowls. I'm my own freaking person, you can't just hog me to yourself. It's like all this time he's always done what Kaken wanted. Like he's just a piece in Kaken's master plan for his life and he's just expected to go along with it. Like it doesn't even matter what he wants. Maybe he doesn't want to join his hero agency when he gets older? Maybe he wants to be like Recovery Girl and go around the world helping where he's needed. Or maybe he just wants to have the freedom to figure it out because God forbid he doesn't know exactly how his life is going to pan out at 14 years old. He just wants to do things and make decisions without Kaken hanging over his shoulder. And fuck, he forced him to use his quirk. It was like Furuya and Akamine all over again. He startles out of his thoughts when he bumps into someone. Oh. Sorry, sir. He apologizes, jumping back. Thankfully, the man waves him off. Don't worry about it, kid, he says, you seen this? He jerks his chin forward and Izuku follows his gaze. There's a few TVs in a shop window all simultaneously playing the news, which is broadcasting a villain fight. It looks like some sort of sludge monster is rampaging in the Tatooine shopping district only a few blocks away. Izuku perks up when he sees the hero Death Arms arrive on scene and quickly takes one of his hero journals to write notes in, pushing his anger out of his mind for the moment. The man beside him gives him an amused glance and asks, "Are you a fanboy?" "Oh." Izuku startles, then shrinks in on himself sheepishly. I guess so, I just really like analyzing quirks and stuff." He trails off, awkwardly, not quite knowing the proper response. Normally Kaken would have saved him from answering by either doing it for him or snapping at the stranger to mind his own business. Thankfully, the man just smiles. "No need to be ashamed," he says, "there are plenty of worse hobbies to have. Oh, would ya look at that?" Izuku looks back at the screen in time to see the villain swatting Death Arms away before attacking his sidekicks. It seems that the sludge villain has taken a woman with a fire quirk hostage and is somehow utilizing her quirk to wreak havoc. Other heroes show up, but it's clear their own powers aren't suited to deal with this situation. Izuku feels bad, both for the woman and the heroes. He knows how awful it is to feel like you are powerless in a certain situation. The struggle goes on for a lot longer than he would have thought it would. The heroes dodge attacks but make no attempt to go on the offense. The woman is unconscious now, hanging limply in the villain's grasp as it continues to use her quirk. It's a rather ugly situation to watch, and the man next to Izuku expresses his disappointment in the heroes. Izuku wants to say something in their defense, but, before he can, a flash of white darts into attack. A moment later he realizes that it's All Might, seemingly in his civilian clothes. The sludge villain grabs onto the #1 hero with its sticky tendrils, but, unlike Death Arms, he's able to pull himself free. Then, he grabs the woman with one hand and with the other he blasts the villain away with a Detroit smash. Izuku's jaw drops in awe, and people around him stop too, looking up at the sky where a large wind tornado spirals upward. A few moments later it dissipates, followed by dark clouds rolling in and drizzling rain. Wow! The man beside him barks, he changed the weather with just one punch. That's All Might for you. Izuku giggles and looks back at the screen where All Might is standing amongst the wreckage of the attack. He raises his fist as the crowd goes wild, then gently scoops up the unconscious woman and brings her to paramedics waiting nearby. While they check her over, he talks to reporters and the other heroes gather up the scattered pieces of sludge. Satisfied, Izuku is about to turn and keep walking when a sharp gasp from a reporter catches his attention. The camera focuses on a paramedic who solemnly declares that the woman is dead, apparently having suffocated while in the sludge villain's grasp. Shocked gasps ripple through the crowd as the camera then focuses on All Might, who looks devastated. The next few minutes are filled with him apologizing repeatedly and expressing his regret, but for some reason he seems a bit restless. Izuku's not the only one that notices, and when All Might abruptly apologizes and says that he must leave, one reporter criticizes him harshly, saying, "You came too late and now you're just going to leave?" Izuku winces. He's sure All Might has his reasons, and he does apologize repeatedly before quickly taking his leave, but his departure doesn't look good to the press. HMPH, the man beside him TSKS, shaking his head, not a good day for the heroes. Izuku swallows and then sighs. Even if it didn't end so well, it was still cool to see All Might. Unfortunately, thanks to the #1 hero it's now drizzling and he doesn't have an umbrella. "I guess I should go home then," he murmurs to himself, then winces. He hopes he doesn't run into Kaken. He'd like to avoid that confrontation for as long as possible. He checks his phone, which is still set on silent since he was in school, and wrinkles his nose at the numerous text messages and missed calls from Kaken. The last one was sent 5 minutes ago. Thankfully, it seems he hasn't said anything to Inko, or otherwise Izuku would have over 100 missed messages. Ignoring the blonde's texts, Izuku pockets his phone and starts walking again. He figures he can find his way home, if he can just find a familiar landmark. Of course he could also probably just search up a map, but it's kind of exciting being out on his own. A bit nerve-wracking since he's lost his protection, but exciting nonetheless. It's like he's exploring, and the best part is that he decides what turns to take instead of just following Kaken around. It doesn't take very long for him to find a familiar street. It's fairly empty at this time of day so he relaxes slightly, enjoying the setting sun beaming on him as he walks down the street. The drizzle has faded away by now, leaving everything slightly damp. Izuku is in the midst of pulling his hair up into a ponytail when the sound of harsh coughing startles him. Pausing, he glances around before following the source of the noise. It leads him towards an alleyway, which makes him a bit nervous. He's always avoided alleys since that day, but they're in a relatively nice neighborhood, so he cautiously continues walking until he can peek his head around the corner. A tall skeleton of a man is leaning heavily against the wall. His eyes are closed and he seems to gasp for breath. Izuku frowns. He doesn't like the sound of that. Every inhale and exhale is slightly gurgly, like there's something wet in his lungs that he can't get out. And he looks awfully skinny, especially in those clothes that are obviously much too large for him. There's also something weirdly familiar about him, So Izuku doesn't feel particularly unsafe as he slowly steps into the alley. Excuse me, sir? The skeletal man startles, his eyes flying open. Izuku startles too and raises his hands placating. I'm sorry, he apologizes. I didn't mean to surprise you, it's just. Are you alright? The man swallows thickly and nods. Izuku frowns and steps a bit closer. Are you sure? He asks, keeping his voice light and friendly. You don't look so good. Do you need help, or is there someone I can call for you? No, the man finally speaks, his voice sounding raspy. I'm fine, really, it's just an old. Just then, Izuku notices the blood in his hand and his eyes widen. Oh my gosh! He gasps, rushing over to his side. You're hurt. The man looks down at his hand, as if he just noticed the blood. Oh, no, this is nothing, really. He gives what Izuku assumes is a grim attempt at a smile. Then the man suddenly chokes and blood spews out of his mouth and right onto Izuku's face. Izuku recoils in disgust and takes a couple of steps back, but the stranger immediately starts fretting over him. Oh my goodness, I am so sorry. He sputters apologies, blood still dribbling down his chin. Here, I can help, let me just. Izuku tenses when the man places his large hands on his shoulders to steady him and immediately reaches up to grab them. But as soon as his fingers make contact with the skin on the man's wrists, his quirk activates, letting him feel the energy flowing through the man. He goes still. Holy shit. He can't help but whisper, his eyes wide as he stares at the man's chest. Usually, when a person is injured, their energy will swirl around the points of their injuries as the body attempts to heal naturally. But this man, not only does he have a huge mass of swirling energy on his left flank, there are some areas where the energy is just missing. Where his left lung and stomach should be, there's no energy at all. It's as if the organs aren't there. It's a horrible wound to feel, and it causes tears to prick at Izuku's eyes. Finally managing to tear his gaze away from the man's chest, he stares up into his eyes and whispers, breathlessly, You're really hurt, aren't you? The man pauses in his fretting and looks down at him, a confused expression on his face. What are you talking about? He asks. He gently tries to pull his hands away, but Izuku doesn't let him, tightening his grip on the man's wrists. Young man, what are you doing? I feel odd. Izuku's quirk activated as soon as he touched the man's skin, immediately reacting to his wounds. But Izuku has never healed an injury this severe before. He can't control his energy as it flows out of him rapidly, trying to reach the wounds as fast as possible, trying to fill what's missing. He feels like his energy is being drained out of him and he wobbles on his feet, the man's hands pressing down on his shoulders to steady him. Kid, are you alright? Izuku can't respond. The man keeps talking, keeps asking something, but it all washes over his ears like a wave. He can barely think. All he knows is that he can't stop the energy from leaving him, and it's terrifying. He's never tried to stop the flow before, but it's also never taken this long to heal someone before. Usually the minor injuries he heals vanish almost instantly, but his energy has rapidly flowing out of him for nearly a minute now. Black dots dance across his vision and his knees buckle. Kid. The stranger cries, struggling to hold him upright. He ends up pressed against his side, the side with that horrible wound, and his quirk sings, reaching out for the wound that he can practically feel through the man's shirt, and the last thing Izuku sees are worried blue eyes peering down at him before his world turns black. Kid. Damn it, kid, what the hell? Toshinori leans over the boy as he gently lays him onto the ground. The boy remains unconscious, leaving Toshinori to wonder what the hell is going on. Shit. He curses to himself, ready to pull out his phone and call an ambulance. For some reason, though, he pauses. Ever since the boy grabbed his wrists, he's been feeling strange. He immediately figured it was the boy's quirk and made to move away, but the boy didn't want to let him go, and Well, whatever he was doing, it didn't feel bad. Gran Torino would probably scold him and say something about quirks being deceiving, but the kid didn't seem like the type to have malicious intentions. If anything, it looked like he activated his quirk by accident. Either way, Toshinori let the curious warm feeling flow into him, and now he feels energized. Which is strange because only a minute ago he felt like he was about to cough up his only lung. And not only does he feel energized, but he feels like he could stay in his muscled form for another 3 hours if he wanted to. Toshinori looks down at the boy, wondering what exactly his quirk is. Well, whatever it is, it clearly affected the boy rather negatively. So, he puffs up into his muscled form, surprised that it doesn't hurt as much as he thought it would, and scoops the kid into his arms, backpack and all. Then he takes off into the sky, aiming for the nearest hospital. He makes sure to clean his blood off of the kid's face before he lands. When the paramedics ask what happened, he makes up a quick lie and says that he just found the boy alone and unconscious in an alley. They believe him without question, of course, and he leaves after that. Normally he would probably go back to his apartment at this time of day, but since he's feeling so great he decides that it wouldn't hurt to stay out longer. There's something that he wanted to do tomorrow, but now he finds the family of the woman who was killed by the sludge villain a mere couple hours before and personally apologizes to them, bowing low to the ground. He doesn't quite know how well they take it. The woman's death is so fresh and there's a good chance they blame him for it, because he sure does, but in the end they thank him, especially when he insists on paying for her funeral. After getting their information and sending it over to his agency, he gives his condolences once more before leaving. It's a pity he wasn't able to reach the woman in time to save her. He'd felt like such an idiot when he realized that the bottle he'd trapped the sludge villain in earlier had fallen out of his pocket while jumping through the sky. Then he'd ended up wasting even more of his precious time searching for the villain again. Thankfully, he'd had just enough energy to defeat the bastard again when he saw the ruckus downtown, but by then it had been too late. Staying to talk to the press had been awful. He'd just been barely holding his hero form, and then leaving right after the woman's death was announced. That looked bad, really bad, even for the #1 hero, and he knows his agency will probably have to deal with some bad press in the coming days. But for now, he pours himself into his work for the next couple of hours, taking down villain after villain until he decides to retire for the night. He still has some energy left, but he doesn't want to risk ending up in a situation like he'd been in earlier when he'd gotten too tired to hold his hero form and deflated in an alleyway. So he heads back to his apartment. He's just about to get into the shower when it happens. A low rumbling noise erupts from his abdomen. He startles so badly he nearly slips and clutches the edge of the shower to steady himself. Eyes wide, he looks down at his torso in surprise. Is it just him? Or is his scar just slightly smaller than it used to be? Jaw slackening, he raises his head and gazes at himself in the mirror above his sink. No, he's spent hours staring at this scar in disgust before, and it's definitely looking less horrible than it usually does, if only slightly. The low rumbling sound returns, and with it a stab of pain. Toshinori chokes. The feeling is so alien and yet so familiar, but he hasn't felt it in 5 years. There's no way he could possibly? No, there's no way. What happened? What the boy? As soon as his eyes widen in realization, his stomach growls again. His stomach. The one that he lost to all for 5 years ago, the one that most certainly wasn't there this morning. Completely forgetting about the shower, Toshinori scrambles for his phone and dials a number. Come on, Chio-san. We need to talk. Chapter 5. Izuku wakes up in complete darkness. His brain feels light and foggy, and it takes him a few moments to process that he is, in fact, awake. When it finally registers, he abruptly jolts into a sitting position and immediately regrets it when a wave of nausea makes his stomach roll. Struggling not to gag, he lets out a small groan, the sound thin and miserable coming from his incredibly dry throat. He swallows thickly and glances around, spotting a glass of water sitting on an unfamiliar nightstand next to his unfamiliar bed. When he moves to reach for it, the world seems to shift beneath him and the nausea returns with a vengeance as he's slammed with a wave of dizziness. Choking back a whine, he manages to wrap his trembling fingers around the glass and brings it back towards himself, not without spilling some water on the sheets. He hastily gulps it down until his stomach churns with dissatisfaction, then shakily wipes his mouth and glances around again. It looks like he's in some sort of hospital room. His mother is fast asleep in a chair next to his bed and there's a needle in his forearm connected to an. As his eyes land on her, his vision swims and he lets his body lean back against his pillows, wishing for the dreadful wave of dizziness to stop. What the hell is going on? He's never felt so nauseous and lightheaded before in his life. What happened to him? A flash of blonde, a horrible empty chasm of energy, his quirk flowing, his quirk singing. Oh. Izuku blinks. That man. He remembers the skeletal man from earlier. How he tried to heal that horrible wound of his. How his quirk wouldn't turn off. He must have drained his own energy so much that he passed out. That would explain why he's currently in a hospital. The man probably called an ambulance. He relaxes slightly. That man had been strange and his injury was even stranger. He wonders how he got so hurt in the first place. If he didn't know any better, he would have thought the man had been missing a couple of organs, what with the way his energy has been absent in some places. Even though he passed out, Izuku hopes he managed to heal him at least a little bit. Coughing up blood must not be fun. His hand trembles violently when he moves to set the now empty glass back on the nightstand, but he somehow manages to do it quietly. He also spots his phone next to a digital clock that says 3 a.m. Grabbing it, he turns it on and, after grimacing against the harsh light that makes his head spin even worse for a solid minute, checks to see what he missed. The first thing he notices is the date. At first, he thinks it must be wrong, but then he sees all the texts from Kaken he ignored after he ran away and they're all from 2 days ago. He's been unconscious for 2 days. Shocked, his head whips towards his mother, an action he regrets as it triggers both dizziness and nausea to rebound, who is still fast asleep. He can't see very well in the low light, but he can tell that she's looking a lot more ragged and exhausted than she usually does. Guilt stabs at his heart. It feels like all he does is worry her. Sighing, he averts his eyes and sinks back into his pillows. It's probably best to let her get as much sleep as she can. He doesn't feel so bad if he doesn't move around too much, so he turns back to his phone. Still ignoring Kaken's texts, he instead checks his social media feed. He follows plenty of All Might fan accounts and most of them are still talking about the sludge villain incident from earlier. Apparently All Might paid a visit to the deceased woman's family later that day and personally apologized. Izuku smiles a bit, continuing to scroll. Another post catches his attention, this time from one of the All Might spotting accounts he follows. He clicks on it and his eyes widen into saucers. Only half an hour after the sludge incident, All Might was spotted carrying a young teenage boy into a hospital. And that boy is him. He stares at the picture in shock. It's angled so his face isn't quite visible, but there's no doubt about it. That's his hair, that's his clothes, that's his backpack. Holy shit. All Might took him to the hospital. The #1 hero saved him. Heart leaping into his throat, he struggles not to squeal out loud and wake up his mother. This is so crazy. He met his hero. Well, sort of. Damn, he wishes he had been conscious. In the back of his mind, he wonders why the skeletal man didn't just call an ambulance for him. He figures that All Might must have come across them right after he passed out. But something about that doesn't sit right. He looks down at the picture again, noticing that All Might was still wearing the same clothes from the sludge incident. He thinks of the skeletal man and how he seemed so weirdly familiar. He thinks of the clothes that hung off his skinny frame, and realizes that they looked exactly like All Might's clothes. That's a strange coincidence, but it doesn't mean anything. Maybe Izuku thought he seemed familiar because his clothes were so similar to All Might's, who he'd seen on the TV earlier that day. But there's just something about the way his clothes were just so obviously big for him. As if they were meant for someone much larger than him. His eyes widen. No way. No freaking way. There's no way. No way All Might could be so skinny, so injured. But maybe that's why he had to leave the sludge incident so suddenly. Izuku? Izuku startles out of his thoughts, glancing over at his mother who is blinking at him blearily. As soon as their eyes meet, she perks up and lunges at him, throwing her arms around his shoulders and immediately bursting into tears. Izuku. She wails, "You're okay. You're okay." Izuku grunts, feeling slightly suffocated, and pats her back comfortingly. As soon as she calms down enough to pull away, she cries, "What happened, Izuku, what happened?" Huh? He tilts his head, bewildered. "I could ask you the same thing." "Oh." She gasps, straightening up. "Oh, right, of course. This must be very confusing for you." She lets out a wet giggle, although Izuku isn't really sure why, and wipes her own tears away. You passed out from quirk exhaustion, sweetie. The doctors said your vitals were low, so your body went into a comatose state in order to regain your strength. And guess what? They said that All Might was the one to bring you in. Apparently he found you, alone and unconscious in an alley, so he brought you to the hospital. Izuku's eyes widen for an entirely different reason, but Inko misreads his reaction and giggles. "I know, right? I was surprised too. I guess I'll have to join one of your All Might fan clubs after this." Inko continues to ramble on about what he's missed over the past couple of days, but Izuku isn't paying attention. He's too busy freaking out as his mind makes connections against his will. All Might found him alone. Alone, as in, without the skeletal man that he used his quirk on. He briefly wonders if the skeletal man perhaps just left him there and ran off after he passed out, but for some reason Izuku doesn't think he'd be the type of person to do that, even though he hardly knows him. But if that man was All Might, then he would have just taken Izuku to the hospital himself. It's really too much for his mind to handle right now. He doesn't even know what he'd do if he found out this is true, that All Might really is like that. Even though he's awake now, he's still extremely tired and nauseous, and his mind is so boggled and confused that he decides to just forget about it for now. Izuku. The boy looks up at his mother as she asks, "What we don't know is what made you lose so much energy in the first place." She looks so nervous, and Izuku knows he can't tell her about the not All Might man that he met, so instead he just quickly comes up with a lie. He stammers, I came across a dog that had been hit by a car and I tried to heal him with my quirk. But, it was really hurt and I guess I used too much energy. I tried to stop when I felt like I was going to pass out, but for some reason I couldn't make my quirk stop. I couldn't even move. It was weird." He finishes lamely and winces. Well, at least the last part isn't a lie. He's still pretty disturbed about that too, but he'll think about it later when the more pressing matters are settled. Inko relaxes in her chair and smiles, reaching out to hold onto his hand. "That's good," she sighs, then corrects herself. "I mean, not good. You definitely should never try something like that again, but I'm just glad it was something that you did and not the fault of some villain." Izuku blinks and shakes his head rapidly, then regrets it when a wave of dizziness hits him. No, it was just me," he says, but has to pause and press a hand to his head when the dizziness lasts a few seconds. Inko frowns. "Izuku? Sweetie, are you okay?" Yeah, he replies. "I just got a little lightheaded." When she continues to look worried, he decides to change the subject. "So, what did you do while I was asleep?" "Oh, Mitsuki-kun and Masaru-kun have been keeping me company for the past couple of days." "So, has Katsuki-kun?" She trails off and Izuku sighs. "He said that you ran off after you two got into an argument." And that's why you were alone when you overused your quirk. Izuku nods once, not saying anything. Inko is obviously curious and gazes at him expectantly. When he still remains silent, she adds, "He didn't really tell us what the fight was about. He just said that you got upset." Izuku shrinks under his mother's gaze as she continues to gaze at him, waiting patiently. Eventually, he looks down at his sheets and mumbles, "He was being a jerk." Inko waits for more, but that's all he's going to say. He's still pissed at Kaken, but he knows that if he tells Inko about it then she'll just give him a lecture about why he should forgive him. He's not going to forgive him that easily, not this time. Thankfully, after a few moments of silence, Inko just sighs and leans back into her chair. "You look tired, honey," she says, "get some more sleep. We'll talk in the morning." She curls back up into her chair and Izuku reluctantly sinks into his pillows once more. He's grateful that she's not pressuring him to talk about it. And even with his mind still whirling from everything that happened, the fight, the not all might, the quirk exhaustion, he still finds himself falling asleep within minutes after his head hits the pillows. When he wakes up again, it's light outside. A quick glance at the clock tells him it's 8 a.m. and his mother is already up and about. She goes to call the doctor as soon as he wakes up and they check him over fairly quickly, taking his vitals while telling him how his quirk exhaustion affected him. He still feels terribly weak, although the nap did help a bit, so they want to monitor him for the rest of the day just to be safe, but they expect that he'll be able to go home by dusk. He's in the middle of eating an extremely healthy breakfast when the Bukagis burst into his room. "Izuku-kun!" Andy Mitsuki cries, and the next thing he knows he's being squeezed tightly by the woman. "Damn it, kid, you scared the shit out of us." "Sorry," he squeaks, squirming in discomfort. Uncle Masaru gently pulls his wife away before expressing his relief to Izuku in a much more mellow manner. Izuku smiles and they chat with him and Inko for a bit, mostly about Izuku's condition and what this will mean for the future. Meanwhile, Izuku pointedly ignores glancing over at Kaken, who remains by the doorway, sulking with his hands shoved unnecessarily deep into his pockets. Izuku can see that his nose is clearly bruised from when he had butted him, but he doesn't feel bad about it in the slightest. Uncle Masaru, of course, is the first to notice the tension between them and mutters something to his wife. Auntie Mitsuki immediately straightens up and grabs Kaken by the arm, dragging him fully into the room while he shrieks indignantly. "I don't know what the fuck you did to piss off Izuku enough to make him run away, but you're gonna fucking fix it right now." Auntie Mitsuki shoves Kaken towards Izuku and he just barely catches himself on the railing beside his bed. "Talk about it, dumbass," she snaps as she proceeds to usher Uncle Masaru and Inko out of the room, "and if I hear you fucking yelling, I'm gonna come in here and kick your ass." The door slams shut with a loud bang, leaving the two boys alone. Kaken grimaces and glances at Izuku, but the latter is stubbornly avoiding his gaze. He simply turns his head the other way and closes his eyes. There's no way in hell that he's going to be the first to apologize. Not this time. Not when it's obviously Kaken's fault for being such a jerk. However, it seems that Kaken doesn't want to be the first to speak either. He just grits his teeth and glares at the ground, silently seething. Neither of them make a sound for nearly 2 minutes. As the silence continues, Izuku feels his irritation grow and grow. Well, since Kaken clearly doesn't plan on saying anything for once in his life, then Izuku's sure as hell going to make sure what he has to say is heard. "I'm gonna go first," he bites out, and Kaken's head snaps up, "and you're going to freaking listen. You're not going to interrupt me or talk over me or anything, none of that crap, alright?" Kaken stares at him, then clenches his jaw and glances away in response. "Good," Izuku says. He takes a deep breath before he starts. "I didn't like all that shit that you said about me. How you think I'm just some guy with a healing quirk and that I need to learn my place?" Kaken's gaze is on him again and Izuku glares at him. "You don't get to decide what my place is, Kaken. I'm my own person, and I'm going to decide what my place is." I'm going to be more than just a guy with a healing quirk, and I'm going to be more than just your healer. I don't care if that pisses you off. We've always ever done things your way, you know? Ever since my quirk manifested. It's like you've already decided everything for me. You've decided that I'm going to work in your hero agency, that I'm going to be your healer, and you think that you can just decide when I can and can't use my quirk? My own damn quirk? His voice starts to rise with his anger, so he stops and takes another deep breath. When he speaks again, his voice is calm but no less firm. Have you ever considered what I wanted? Because I've never even thought I could consider that until now. I've been so wrapped up just being a little piece in your master plan for your own life that I never considered that I could want something different. So, I'm going to decide stuff for myself now. I don't know exactly where I'm going to end up in the future, but whatever it is, you're just going to have to deal with it. Kaken had been fidgeting impatiently ever since he started talking, but now he steps forward and snaps, "Listen here you little I'm not fucking done." Izuku interrupts him, "You don't get to say your part until I've said mine." Kaken glares at him with fiery red eyes, grinding his teeth audibly, but he says nothing. Izuku tries again, now. In regards to Harukan. That little fucker deserved it. Kaken explodes, he deserved every bit of oi. Auntie Mitsuki's voice shouts through the door, "Don't make me fucking come in there, brat." Kaken snarls wordlessly at the door but falls silent. Izuku immediately continues. "He did not deserve to be treated that way," he says firmly, "especially not by someone who's aiming to be a hero." Kaken flinches ever so slightly. "How do you think things will go in Kaken? You think they'll just let shit like that fly? Heroes aren't supposed to want to hurt people, Kaken. And damn it, I'm allowed to have friends other than you. Harukan is nice to me and makes me laugh and smile. If you really cared about me you would be happy about that. But no, you just get jealous because God forbid you don't get to hog me to yourself. And it's not just him. Ever since junior high started you've just been downright mean to people and I don't get it. Does it make you feel better to push other people down? Does it make you feel big and strong when you beat them up? Well, let me tell you something, Kaken, all it does is make you look pathetic. And I meant what I said back there, too. I will never stay by your side if all you do is hurt people. Kaken stares at him with wide eyes, his mouth opening and closing repeatedly. After a few moments of him struggling uselessly to find his words, he grits his teeth and glares. So, what are you fucking saying then? He growls. You, what? You don't wanna be friends anymore? Is that it? Izuku groans. No, Kaken, he sighs heavily and rubs his face tiredly. I just need some space. You're just so controlling, Kaken. And possessive. And what we have isn't healthy. We're never going to grow if we're attached to the hip all the time. I want to be able to figure things out by myself and figure out what I want to do with my life without having to work our friendship into my plans as well. If we're true friends then we won't even have to work to stay in each other's lives, we'll just naturally always be there for each other. We need some space, Kaken. Kaken is quiet for a long time after that. He opens his mouth, looking like he wants to go on a rant of his own, but then he closes it. He glares at Izuku for a while, then at the ground. His fists clench and unclench repeatedly as he thinks, displaying his anger. Finally, he tosses his head and scoffs, whatever. Izuku must look disappointed, because he adds, I mean, yeah, whatever. I still gotta walk you to school and shit, but whatever, you follow around whoever the fuck you want to when we're in school. See if I care. He swallows, scowling as he shoves his hands back into his pockets. And I'll stop beating people up. For you, he grumbles. It's not enough. No, not for me, Izuku presses. I want you to stop hurting people because you know it's wrong. Kaken rolls his eyes and huffs, sure, whatever. The kids at school are weak-ass losers anyway. It's not perfect? It wasn't even an apology, really. Izuku still has a bad taste in his mouth when Kaken leaves the room, but it's something. The beginnings of progress. Now Izuku just has to wait and see if Kaken will keep his word. And if he does, well, they'll go from there. Shoulders feeling slightly lighter, Izuku spends the rest of the morning in bed. A doctor comes in later to check on him and has him walk around a bit to see if he's steady. Despite the lightheadedness and nausea returning with the movement, he somehow is able to walk on his own, but his legs tremble with the effort and he ends up leaning against the wall for support after just a minute. His mother, of course, is extremely concerned, but the doctor says his body is still trying to rebuild its energy after it was depleted so suddenly and to expect some weakness for the next few days. He's having lunch when he's told that some people are here to see him. He sighs, glancing down at his half-eaten sandwich. What's with people interrupting him when he eats? First the Bakugas and now. Wait, who's here? Inko frowns and glances at him questioningly, but he shrugs, just as clueless as she is. His mother gets up and goes to speak with the doctor in hushed voices. Izuku can't hear what they're saying, but he tenses up when Inko gasps. She nods frantically and goes to stand beside Izuku while the doctor goes to open the door. Mom, what's going? Izuku's jaw drops when the door swings open and Recovery Girl walks into his room. Like, the Recovery Girl. She's in his room. He's in the same room as Recovery Girl. He doesn't think he can get any more surprised. But then Not All Might walks in right after her. His eyes must be as wide as dinner plates and he must be catching flies with how low his jaw is hanging, but he can't bring himself to react in any other way aside from utter shock. Recovery Girl smiles at him and he nearly dies. As she moves to sit on a chair next to his bed, she greets, "Hello, Midoriya-kun." Izuku lets out a strangled noise. She knows his name. The healer chuckles at his reaction and it's enough to make him snap his jaw closed. He blushes furiously and stammers out in a high-pitched voice, Hello. Recovery Girl. You're your Recovery Girl. Hi." This time when she laughs, so does Not All Might. Izuku turns to him apprehensively. If he's here, then that must mean something, right? Why would a random stranger come to see him unless he was? But could he really be All Might? Could the #1 hero really be this scrawny? Izuku is dying to ask a million questions like who are you and what the hell is going on? Not All Might is watching him intently, as if he's trying to read his thoughts. Izuku gulps and glances back at Recovery Girl, who he now notices is watching him just as intently as Not All Might. He doesn't know what to say. "Thank you for showing us the way, Sugawara-san," Recovery Girl says. It takes Izuku a moment to realize she's talking to his doctor. "Do you mind if I talk to Midoriya-kun privately for a moment?" The doctor nods and quickly leaves. It isn't until Recovery Girl turns to Inko expectantly that she realizes she means her too. "Oh." Inko jumps in surprise. Are you sure?" She glances between her son and the two adults nervously, her gaze lingering on Not All Might. Obviously she isn't too keen on leaving her only son with strangers. "Mom," Izuku stresses, "come on, it's Recovery Girl." He emphasizes her name as if just that will convince his mother that she's trustworthy. It's enough for Inko. Right, of course." Inko hurriedly gathers her coat and purse and steps out of the room. "My apologies. Take as much time as you need." The door shuts behind her and Izuku turns to the two adults. Not All Might opens his mouth to speak, but before he can, Izuku's restraint breaks. "Are you All Might?" he blurts out. The man blinks in surprise. Slapping his hands over his mouth, Izuku mentally curses himself before stammering, I'm sorry. It's such a weird and random question, but when I thought about it, it made sense because your clothes were the same as his when he was fighting the sludge villain and when he brought me to the hospital, but they said he found me alone, but you were there, young Midoriya, and I thought maybe you ditched me, but then I kept thinking and wondering about your injury and how All Might had to leave so suddenly when he fought the Slime villain young Midoriya, but it's crazy, right? I mean, there's no way All Might can look like you, not that you look bad or anything, but you just look very different, and not All Might sighs heavily and suddenly inflates? There's no other way to describe it. But the next thing Izuku knows, there's a very big and very real All Might standing before him. Izuku chokes. Recovery Girl, seeming very disgruntled but not at all surprised, glares at All Might and says, "Thanks for the warning, you drama queen." All Might grins briefly before shrinking back down into the skinny stranger that he'd met a couple of days ago. Well, he shrugs sheepishly, sitting down into another chair with a huff. He basically figured it out anyway. To Izuku, he asks, "You're a clever one, aren't you?" The noises that are coming out of Izuku's mouth don't even sound human anymore. This can't be real. There's no way that All Might is in his room right now, in this form. Even though Izuku was thinking about it, he didn't really expect his theory to ever be confirmed. But now, he gawks. I don't understand is what he wants to say. But then All Might's words sink in and he hesitates, taking a moment to try and focus his racing mind. Your injury," he stammers, looking up at the number one hero. "It makes you like this?" All Might nods seriously. "You know how guys at the pool are always sucking in and flexing and try to hold their buff? I'm like that." His words completely contradict his grave attitude. Izuku sputters and Recovery Girl rolls her eyes. "Oh, come on. You owe this poor boy an explanation, especially before." She trails off and Izuku frowns. "Before what?" "Right, sorry," All Might apologizes, then looks at Izuku. "I hope I don't have to tell you how important it is that you don't tell this to anyone." "Right." Izuku yelps, spine nearly snapping as he straightens up immediately. "Of course." All Might saves everyone and wins the day with a fearless smile. "If people knew about your injury." All Might nods again. "Good, so you understand then." Izuku blanks. Not really. He's completely unprepared for the gruesome injury the number one hero reveals when he lifts up his shirt. It's an ugly, gnarled scar that spreads all across his left torso, and Izuku instantly knows that this is the injury he felt when he used his quirk on the man. "I got this from an enemy's attack 5 years ago," All Might explains with a grimace. "Believe it or not, before I met you it looked a lot worse." "Worse?" Izuku squeaks in disbelief. "It already looks so horrible. Half of my respiratory organs were destroyed," All Might goes on, "and I lost my whole stomach. I've become emaciated from repeated surgeries and the after effects." "That's terrible," Izuku whispers. As All Might lowers his shirt, he asks, "You said 5 years ago. So was it your fight with Toxic Chainsaw?" "Hey, you know your stuff, kid." Izuku blushes. "But no, a punk like that couldn't defeat me. I asked that this fight not be made public to the world." All Might gives a pale imitation of his signature smile. It's more of a grimace. "I will save people with a smile. The symbol of peace cannot be daunted by evil." However, deep down I was very afraid. My body has been steadily failing me over the past 5 years, and no matter how many healers I saw, none of them could fix what that villain had done to me. Izuku is quiet as All Might leans forward in his chair, his gaze intense. So imagine my surprise when a 14-year-old boy stumbles upon me hacking my lung out in the middle of an alley and proceeds to not only give me enough energy to maintain my muscle form for hours afterwards, but to also regrow my entire stomach. Izuku doesn't quite process that right away. "Huh?" he squeaks. "Huh? I what?" All Might tilts his head. "You didn't know?" "No." Izuku is beyond shocked. No way. I had never tried healing such a large wound before. And I've never really had quirk exhaustion before." He trails off anxiously, pulling at the edge of his shirt. A whole stomach. All Might turns to share a glance with Recovery Girl. The woman straightens up a bit and asks, "Midoriya-kun, do you mind telling us how your quirk works?" "Oh. Right. Of course. This is far from the first time Izuku has had to explain his quirk to someone, so the explanation comes easy to him. It's called healing energy. Basically, as soon as I touch someone's skin, my quirk will activate and, depending on whether or not they're injured, release a flow of my own energy into their body to heal their wounds. I can also sense a person's own natural energy, and it helps me tell where and what their injuries are, although it's not super specific. It also doesn't work with illnesses or when I myself am injured. And, something I noticed when I was healing All Might. I can't seem to be able to stop my quirk once it's activated. I mean, I had never really tried to before since I only ever healed minor injuries. So, I think that's why I passed out. B. Because your injury required more energy than I had to give. All Might and Recovery Girl are staring at him with mixed expressions of curiosity and solemnity. Shrinking a bit under the attention, Izuku scratches the back of his head nervously. I guess I don't really have that much control over my quirk, really. It kind of just does its thing, he laughs awkwardly. Yes. Recovery Girl says, frowning, that was really quite a dangerous thing for you to do, Midoriya-kun. Frankly, I've never heard of a healing quirk powerful enough to regrow lost limbs or organs. Usually that's only the case for some self-healing or self-regeneration quirks. And the fact that your quirk is fueled by your own energy. Well, it was a very reckless thing to do without proper training. However, it sounds like you didn't quite know to what extent your quirk would go to heal. Alright. Izuku nods. Do you want to be a healer? All Might asks suddenly. Izuku looks at him in surprise. Huh? A healer? Surely you must have heard of them. He nods and the man asks, well? A small, bashful smile creeps onto his lips as he looks down at his lap. I've wanted to be a healer ever since my quirk manifested, he admits. All Might smiles. Well, I think you'll be a fantastic healer, young Midoriya. Izuku nearly passes out. All Might laughs as he starts sputtering. I'm serious, kid. He barks. I've seen just about every single one of the most powerful healers out there and none of them were able to do what you have done for me. Young Midoriya. All Might leans closer and puts a large hand on his shoulder, his gaze firm. I ate a cheeseburger yesterday. It's such an odd and out-of-place statement that Izuku can't help the disbelieving laugh that escapes his lips. What? Recovery Girl rolls her eyes. And since he's barely been eating for the past 5 years, he threw up the entire thing 20 minutes later. It was worth it, All Might says resolutely. And it happened thanks to you. Flustered, Izuku ducks his head. I didn't even know I could do something like that, he says. I knew my quirk was powerful, but your quirk is powerful, Recovery Girl says. I knew that as soon as All Might told me about you. And I'm glad to hear that you want to become a healer, because now I can make my offer without much trouble. Izuku blinks. Offer? I want you to come to us so that I can personally train you, Recovery Girl says, and Izuku's heart stops. You what? It's one of the reasons we came here today, actually, All Might says. Well, 1 because I wanted to thank you, and 2 because we figured it would be a good opportunity for everyone involved. You're in your 3rd year of junior high, right? Izuku nods. Then I can get you into the hero course through recommendations. Izuku can hardly process all this. What a hero course. But my quirk, it's not combative. Yes, but healers are, in fact, considered heroes, Recovery Girl explains. There are a lot of different ways you can serve as a healer. Some are combat medics, meaning they're often on the scene with heroes ready to provide medical aid. Others are part of rescue teams that save civilians in events like natural disasters. No matter what you choose to do, you are going to need to learn how to fight and be able to handle yourself in dangerous situations. Izuku listens with rapt attention. He'd never even considered all those other skills he'd need to know. He's just been relying on his quirk so much. But still, he asks, the hero course. Would I really be able to get through it with a non-combative quirk? Most of the classes in the day of a student in the Hero course consists of general education classes, which you will take along with your classmates. As for the Hero classes, you would participate unless the lesson involves the students directly using their quirk for combat or particular situations. Which might seem like all of them, but don't worry. A lot of the classes also focus on basic fighting skills and preparing the students for a variety of different situations and scenarios. And whenever you aren't participating in a class, you'll be on standby in case someone gets hurt, which, in the Hero course, is often. Recovery Girl huffs at this before continuing. I know perhaps this wasn't what you were expecting out of your high school experience, but in the Hero course you'll be presented with more opportunities to heal bigger injuries and train your quirk. Once she's finished, the two pro heroes gaze at him expectantly. Izuku blinks rapidly, trying to process the sudden onslaught of information. This is better than anything he could have asked for. He's getting the chance to train with Recovery Girl. To get into A through recommendations? It's too good to be true. He's still not entirely convinced that this isn't all just a dream. But there's just something he still doesn't quite understand. I thank you, he says breathlessly. Thank you so much, this is such a wonderful opportunity. But I don't understand. This is so much you're offering to me and I just... Why are you helping me? They stare at him as if they're confused by his question. Looking down at his lap, he wrings his hands as he continues in a soft voice, my mother told me when I was younger that people would want me for my quirk. That both heroes and villains would seek me out. And I just remember thinking that was so weird. That I'm desirable to people I don't even know. And I just can't help but wonder. All Might stops him before he can continue. He leans forward and places a hand over Izuku's, stopping them. Young Midoriya, he says, his blue eyes piercing, would you have healed me even if you knew the effect it would have on you? Would you have sacrificed yourself for my sake? Izuku frowns, confused. Yes, of course. All Might smiles and leans back, seemingly satisfied. Well, then, there's your answer. Huh? The very core of being a healer, no, of being a hero, is having the will to sacrifice oneself for another. All Might says, young Midoriya, you would be a great healer even if you were quirkless. Izuku inhales sharply, his wide eyes filling with tears. He quickly averts his gaze, but he can't help letting a couple of tears escape and roll down his cheeks. He clutches at the warm feeling blooming in his chest as the corner of his lips twitch up into a smile. He didn't realize how badly he needed to hear those words until now. Thank you, he whispers. All Might dips his head. You know, there are so few healers in the world, we need to stick together, Recovery Girl says gently, and I know you can become a healer that will save countless lives. It would be an honor if you would allow me to train you. Also, she smiles and laughs a little. I'm getting on in years, and with so many injured kids it would be nice to have an apprentice around to help me out. Izuku giggles and nods. Of course. I'd love to. He turns to All Might. And I would be more than happy to heal the rest of your injuries as soon as I am capable. As soon as you've trained your quirk, Recovery Girl says pointedly, you are going to need a much better grasp over the power of yours before you can even consider healing someone like All Might again. I don't want you to go into another coma from quirk exhaustion. Izuku frowns a bit. Right. Looking up at All Might, he says with some worry, I don't know how long that will take, but